Welcome to Sinister Black Echoes, where we'll share horror stories that make your skin crawl. Today we have two short stories. The first story is how a girl walked through a forest at night while a guy with a knife was close behind. The second story is how a town got erased from the face of the world. Stay tuned to find out what happens.
It was the summer before my senior year in college. My little brother, always interested in military stuff, had gotten a pair of night vision goggles for his birthday and he'd left them at my apartment. One night I was bored and decided to go try out the goggles at a wooded hiking area/nature preserve nearby. In retrospect, this seems like a very stupid idea since I was all by myself and female, but I was young and stupid, and I got myself all excited at the possibility of seeing deer and other woodland creatures in their natural nighttime habitat. I was familiar with these woods, my best friend and I had hiked there at night before and we'd never run into anyone else. Our area is mostly rural and pretty safe, so I didn't anticipate any trouble. I parked in the little sparsely lit parking area, ignored the sign park closes at 10 and entered the woods, night vision goggles in hand. It was a half moon that night, and that was the only light that filtered down through the canopy of trees. It was pretty dark, and I didn't want to put on the goggles until I'd found a place to sit down, so I lit my way with the mini maglite on my keychain. A couple of times I thought I heard a little rustling in the woods a fair distance away, but it was nothing out of the ordinary and I put it down to animal activity, hopefully the deer I'd come hoping to see. After I'd hiked in a fair distance, I found a fallen log to sit on and put on the goggles. I don't know if you've ever used night vision goggles before, but the effect is impressive. They can turn near pitch darkness into bright as day. Everything appears in shades of green, but quite bright and clear. For a while, I had a blast looking around from my fallen log vantage point. Some chipmunks played around in the leaves nearby, and a big owl blinked its lamp-like eyes at me from a tree branch. No deer though, and I started to think that maybe they wouldn't be likely to come anywhere near me, darkness or no, if I sat right out in the open on a log. So, I decided to find a place where I could be a little more hidden. I made my way a little deeper into the woods and finally found a huge tree. Perfect for climbing. I've always loved climbing trees, so it was nothing for me to hoist myself up a few branches and settle in to wait for my deer. I didn't get to see any. What I did see, lit up in bright night vision green after about 10 minutes of waiting, was this: a man, dressed head to toe in dark-colored clothing, making his way stealthily through the woods. He was coming from the same direction I'd come and was clearly trying to stay hidden, moving from tree to tree and glancing around carefully before moving on again. It looked very much like he was looking for someone. It took me a few moments to notice that he was carrying something, and when I saw what it was, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. He had a knife, a big one, and he was gripping it as if he expected to use it in the very near future. It wasn't deer hunting season, and this was a nature preserve where hunting of any kind was prohibited. And at any rate, the guy was alone and not dressed like a hunter. There were no deer in sight, and very few hunters kill their prey with knives. I was suddenly horribly aware of my situation, a young woman alone, weaponless, in the middle of the woods at night. This was the 90s, so no cell phones, and even if I'd had one, I wouldn't have felt safe using it lest I draw his attention. I didn't know how he was able to see so well in the dark. I guess his eyes had just adjusted, and I was terrified he would look up and see me. I sat there, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, and watched him as he continued his methodical and stealthy process of scanning the forest for who or whatever the hell he was stalking. I scanned around but couldn't see anyone else, even from my high vantage point, and the sickening thought struck me that he might be looking for me. I remembered the rustling noises I'd heard in the woods when I first arrived, and then I thought back further and remembered something else: a white car that had followed too close behind me for most of my drive to the nature preserve. I'd been annoyed and a little freaked out at the time, but when I'd turned into the nature preserve parking area, the white car had passed me and driven on its way, and I hadn't thought anything more of it. Now I wondered, horrified, if this was the driver of that car, if he'd circled back and seen my parked car, alone in the lot. If he'd come in after me. I sat, paralyzed with fear, and watched the man for what felt like forever but was probably another half hour or so. There was a heart-stopping moment when he paused right underneath my tree, and I was sure he was going to look up and find me, but he didn't. After a while he seemed to give up on whatever plan he had in mind. I heard him say "fuck it," and he started heading back in the direction he'd come, the direction of the parking area. I stayed in the tree, wet with sweat and crying, until the sun came up a few hours later. Then I climbed down and, still terrified, gripping the little can of pepper spray on my keychain, I made my way as fast as I could to the parking lot. The man had been there. My windshield had been smashed with a rock, and someone had scraped all down the sides of the car with something sharp. Presumably, a giant knife that I'm lucky didn't end up in my chest. Thank God for the night vision goggles that let me see him before he could see me, and thank God for big trees with sturdy branches. Creepy forest stranger, let's never meet again. Edit. To answer some of the questions I've gotten in the comments and PMs, I did call the police once I got back home. 2 very nice cops came to my apartment and took a report, and that was unfortunately the last I heard of it. Which from what I've seen on this sub is fairly typical, bummer though that is.
Enjoying the story so far? Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more captivating content like this. By subscribing, you'll never miss out on the latest adventures and terrifying tales. Thank you for your support. Now on to the next story.
Everyone says my hometown doesn't exist. I'm beginning to believe them. But that doesn't mean that was always the case. Let me back up. The first time I encountered this bizarre denial was after my first semester at college. I trekked to the Amtrak station, luggage in tow, and asked the attendant for 1 ticket to Casey Falls, Michigan, please. She looked up from her desk and blinked. Where? Casey Falls, Michigan, I repeated, a smidge slower this time. After she performed a search on her computer, then sought counsel from her manager, they determined that, if Casey Falls was a real place, it wasn't a stop on any of their lines. How can that be? I protested. I could see its train station as clearly in my mind's eye as their bewildered faces before me. Every spring break, I took the train with my family into Chicago, boarding at 7 o'clock in the morning at the platform just east of Berry Street. Dad would hand me $2 to buy a Coke and a bag of pretzels from the vending machines before the train arrived. My younger sister Janie and I sat impatiently on the benches waiting for our journey to begin, but relaying this memory to the exasperated attendants did little to correct their system, which omitted Casey Falls from its available destinations. I spent that Christmas alone in my dorm, desperately trying to get a hold of my family, but none of them answered. Mom, Dad, sister, phone, email, text, Facebook, nothing. Even stranger was that. Overnight, their online presence vanished. Erased socials, bounced emails. When I called again, a recording informed me that the numbers I was trying to reach had been disconnected. What is going on? The following 2 weeks, ordinarily spent opening presents, reconnecting with high school friends, ringing in the new year, were instead subsumed under my intense investigation. I scrubbed the internet for any mention of my hometown. I came up empty-handed. Despite endless hours scouring Google, Yahoo, even Bing, I found no mention of the central Michigan burg, ensconced in forest, home to Casey Falls Army Training Camp and the defunct, collapsed copper mines. Even Google Maps erased Casey Falls from its records. Where ordinarily I would see the cluster of homes and farms in Main Street, there was only a green swath of forest land. My hometown had literally been wiped off the map. Worse yet, it was beginning to disappear from my own memory. As break rolled on and my ceaseless search failed to yield a shred of evidence of my hometown's existence, I noticed my own recollection of it fading. While staring bleary-eyed at the television on New Year's Eve, watching revelers crowd Times Square to watch the Spangled Ball drop, I realized I couldn't remember any previous New Year's Eve. How had I spent them in Casey Falls? Maybe it was common to forget a few, for their memories to bleed into one another, to mix up which party went with which year, but to lose every New Year's Eve from one's personal history? I felt hollow, and in the void where Casey Falls and my preceding 18 years of memory should have been. Something dark and sinister lurked. When my roommate returned in January and saw that I'd been holed up in our dorm for the entire break, he naturally inquired what happened. What happened indeed? was my mad response. Desperate for a memory of home, even if secondhand, I interrogated Sean. Surely you remember me talking about home at some point, right? I asked. And while he agreed that, surely, in our various 2 a.m. chats we must have touched on the subject, he was chagrined to admit nothing specific returned. The silver lining to this distressing chat was that I now had a partner. Sean, fascinated by my absent origin, took up the cause with me. He caught up quick, performing his own research online before arriving at the conclusion that we had to see for ourselves. So, on a weekend in late January, he drove us in his junky sedan into the heart of the mitten, to where Casey Falls should have carved out a space for itself from the surrounding forest. To my horror, we found only trees. Where Main should have intersected with Blanchard, there was only a dirt drive reaching back into the woods. Sean didn't think his car would handle the uneven road too well, but after some pleading, he acquiesced. We drove slow along the forested road, tree branches squeezing us into a tunnel of foliage. Right here, I said. Casey Falls should be right here. I leapt out of the car and raced through the woods. I'm not sure why, I don't think it was rational, just my emotions taking control, a medley comprising anger, grief, confusion, fear, that propelled me through the underbrush until I tripped over something metal. I turned back to find a green box, like a geocache, resting on the forest floor. Inside, pages yellowed with age featured some sort of code scrawled across them, written with only half-decent penmanship. "What the hell is that?" asked Sean when he finally caught up to me. It was the question we tried pairing with an answer over the ensuing month. Neither of us were real codebreakers, so we shopped the pages around campus, taking it to math nerds and professors in the hopes one of them might crack it. One by one, they tried their best to decipher the documents, but each one met invariably with defeat. One professor called it the toughest code she'd ever encountered, while another suggested, in all likelihood, the pages were rubbish. But the fact that I'd found it where my hometown should have been kept me from accepting the latter explanation. Something was written in those pages, something that helped explain what happened to Casey Falls, but I'll never uncover its secrets. Because, on March 3rd, someone tore our dorm room apart and the only thing they took with them was the coded pages. Spooked by this flagrant invasion of privacy, Sean told me he would pursue the Casey Falls mystery no further. He believed that by showing the documents around campus, we'd attracted the attention of the feds, CIA, NSA, some other three-letter agency no one had ever heard of, and now we were being watched. "Whatever happened to your hometown?" Sean said, "They don't want anyone to find out." The next week, Sean transferred out, enrolling in a school on the East Coast. He left without saying goodbye, another exit without ceremony. I've since taken a barista job to be able to stay in Chicago through the summer, since I've got nowhere else to go. While reckoning with the fact I've become an orphan, in every sense of the word, I can't help shaking the feeling that someone is watching me. Whatever happened to Casey Falls, it wasn't good. I can feel it in my bones, the unheard screams of family and neighbors vibrating in the marrow. I feel them, and it makes me sick, but I cling to the horror because it's all I have left of home.
And that wraps up this video. To all of you who have followed along on this journey, thank you for joining us in this adventure. If you would like to hear more in the future, please like and subscribe. Your support and enthusiasm mean the world to us. Until next time.